Now, I want to cross to London in a second and catch up with Brendan O'Neill, our good friend. Haven't spoken to him for a long time. He's been busy working on a new book. It's called A Heretic's Manifesto, Essays on the Unsayable. It's a brilliant book that tells us really the term cancel culture is too soft for the sort of censorship that's going on. I want to read you this quote from his introduction. He says that every enlightened idea, science is real, race is not, women should have rights, freedom is good, reason is the best tool for making sense of the world. All these risk being crushed under the forever spinning wheel of correct thought. Great to talk to you again, Brendan. I've had a bit of a look through the book, brilliant essays. Let's start off with this idea that you reckon cancel culture is too cute, too soft a term for what's really going on, that you see as a threat to our whole civilisation, really.
Yeah, well, I quite like the term cancel culture, I have to be honest, and I do use it quite a lot. People understand what it means. It has a big connection with the public, I think. So I think it's okay as a phrase to describe some of the censorship we face today. But the point I make in my book is that it's just not enough. It's not enough to describe and outline the attack on the Enlightenment that we are currently living through. And you see it all the time. You see it in the current climate change hysteria, for example, that we're all forbidden from criticizing or discussing in a rational way, which I think is an attack on reason and on scientific truth and on the right of people to talk about the problems that our society face in a rational, calm manner. And so across the board, I think on lots of different issues, we are seeing a revolt against reason, a revolt against freedom of speech, and a revolt against ordinary people's right to think clearly and speak openly about the problems in our world. And all of that, I think, adds up to a counter-enlightenment more than to cancel culture.
Yeah, you are so right. And let me have a look at a couple of examples here that make the point so clearly. I want to go to another quote from your book, and this is from a chapter called Her Penis. You say, her penis, nothing better captures the irrationalism of our age and also the slippery authoritarianism of it than the fact that this nonsensical phrase is frequently uttered, and as much in the respectable press as in the gender bedlam of internet discussion forums. I mean, it's true, Brendan. It's just the insanity of that phrase, her penis, yet we're having judges and politicians and experts utter it with a serious look on their face.
Absolutely. And here in the UK, you see those two words, her penis. You see them in the Times newspaper, the newspaper of record. You see them on the BBC, the public broadcaster. As you say, they've been uttered in courtrooms, for example. If a male rapist now identifies as a woman, people will say her penis when they're giving evidence in relation to the crimes that he allegedly committed. It's crazy. The established media, the judicial system, the police service, even the prison service now say things like her penis. And of course, it's a completely irrational phrase. It makes no sense logically at all. And I think most of us know that it makes no sense. And what it represents, I think, is the subjugation of truth and objectivity, the truth in this case being that only men have penises, not women. It represents the subjugation of that truth to ideology, to the gender ideology, to the fashions of our times, one of which is the idea that people can change sex on a whim. And one of the themes of my book is the way in which the manipulation of language can lead to the manipulation of thought. And I think her penis is a perfect example of that, because we're encouraged to use a newspeak phrase like that precisely in order to change how we think about sex and gender and to make us think that even people with penises can be women. So there is an all-out assault on not only on our right to speak, but also on how we think about the issues in our world.
You are so right again on that. I mean, you only need to reread George Orwell and The Politics of the English Language to see how language impacts on the way we think. And I think the COVID pandemic is important here, and this is something I've been focusing on in Australia, where I've revealed the extent to which our federal government secretly censored a lot of online communications when it came to COVID. And you've written in your book that from the very start of the pandemic, speech itself was treated as a potential threat, as its own form of plague. So this has gone on right around the world, where they've tried to control what we said about the pandemic, let alone what we did.
Absolutely. And that started at the very beginning. I remember reading things in March 2020, which is when COVID really took off in Western countries. I remember reading articles in which people were saying, look, there are two plagues here. There are two diseases. There's the disease of COVID-19, and there's also the disease of misinformation. There's the disease of people going online and saying things about COVID that are incorrect. Or later in 2020, people were criticizing mask mandates, criticizing lockdown policies. I was one of the critics of some of the lockdown measures too. I thought they were far too severe. All of that was represented as a plague of wrongthink, a plague of misinformation. So we witnessed a two-pronged assault. Firstly, against the disease itself, which I think it was quite important for us to tackle this illness, but also against freedom of thought, freedom of speech, the right of people to go online and call into question social policies, the enforcement of mask wearing, all these kinds of ideas that I think we should be perfectly at liberty to talk about and to criticize. So the way in which COVID was folded into the broader attack in the 21st century on ordinary people's right to dissent, that was incredibly worrying. And that's another thing I cover in my book, where I make the point that in a time of crisis, in a time of a health crisis, freedom of speech doesn't become a luxury. It becomes more important because all of us should have the right to discuss how we should approach a problem that faces our country like COVID.
Absolutely, Brendan. You are so correct in that analysis. There's another theme that you pick up in the book that I love, and that is that the people who are supposedly tackling hate speech and intolerance are so hateful themselves. So fantastic book, fantastic essays, and thanks for sharing some of that with us, Brendan. I appreciate it. There's the book, A Heretic's Manifesto by Brendan O'Neill, Essays on the Unsayable.